In the early 2000s, Ronaldo was perhaps the best striker in the world, leading Brazil to a World Cup triumph in 2002. But even though Ronaldo perhaps was the best striker, people were already talking about someone who was bigger, stronger, faster, and who could develop to be even better. His name was Adriano. But what happened to Adriano? Because we don't exactly talk too much about him these days, do we? Let me try to explain. So Adriano started his career at Flamengo, and much like Ronaldo, he was brought to Europe and played for Inter, whereas Ronaldo obviously went through PSV and Barcelona before ending up in Italy. Adriano went straight to Inter, and he didn't use too much time to make an impact. In a friendly game against Real Madrid at Santiago Bernabeu in 2001, he was subbed on and he completely hammered in a free kick. Aged 19, he was the talking point after that game, and Inter won 2-1, and Adriano again had staked his claim. He was huge, he was strong, he was fast, and had an incredible power that seemingly no one could be compared to. And he didn't play too much his first season, which meant that Parma decided to co-own him. They bought a stake in his contract. Now this is something that happened in Italian football a long time ago, where clubs basically owned a slice of the player's registrational rights and then decided who would field him. Perhaps I should do a video on this. Anyways. Adriano played alongside, so there was Adriano and Adrian. At that point, he became one of the best strikers in Italy and earned a nickname, the Emperor, l'Imperatore, for those who speak Italian. Not sure that was right, but anywho, who cares? He was the Emperor. He was big, strong, fast, and he started to score goals and kind of created headlines all over Europe. So much so that when Parma were in dire straits and Adriano had scored pretty much all the goals seemingly alongside Mutu, Inter decided to buy the rest of the stake in his contract, making him officially an Inter player in January 2004. For Parma, he had scored 22 times in 37 matches, and after having impressed for Inter as well during the 2004 period of the 2003-2004 season, he was elected to play for Brazil at the 2004 Copa America. Now this becomes perhaps the pivotal moment in Adriano's career, and also, in some ways, the highlight of his career. In total, he scores 7 goals, including a hat-trick against Costa Rica, but it's the final against Argentina that we sort of talk about when we speak about Adriano in 2004 Copa America. Because as Brazil were trailing 2-1 against Argentina going into injury time, Adriano somehow managed, his back turned to goal, to lob the ball up in the air, and as the ball was in the air, turned 180 degrees and completely smashed the ball into the net, sending the game into extra time, eventually going to penalties and Brazil winning the Copa America. Now, this becomes, as I mentioned, the highlight of his career. At this point, Adriano is mentioned as perhaps the best striker in the world. He becomes the Golden Boot winner for the top scorer of the tournament, and also is mentioned, or elected, I should say, into the team of the tournament. Adriano is at top of the world. This alongside someone who becomes very important to his life and to the situation he is in now. His father, Almir. I believe it's the journalist Tim Vickery who wrote that one of the things they remembered from that tournament was that Adriano celebrated his Copa America win alongside his father, and that the press basically saw that there was a very tight bond between father and son. And that bond is quickly taken away because as 2004 develops, Almir passes away. Inter teammate Javier Zanetti witnessed when Adriano was given the news of his father's passing, and he said this in an interview: "I saw him in his room. He threw his phone and started screaming. You couldn't imagine that kind of scream. I get goosebumps even to this day." Since that day, Massimo Moratti, Inter chairman, and myself watched over him as he was our little brother. He kept playing football, scoring goals, and pointing to the sky, dedicating the goals to his father. After that phone call, nothing was the same. And nothing ever seemingly was the same for Adriano. Though the 2004-2005 season is, in some way, at least statistically, the best season of Adriano's career. He scores 28 goals in 42 matches. He scores several of them in the Champions League. He wins the Coppa Italia. He takes Inter to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and they finish third in Serie A. And then starts a pretty slow but telling demise. Now we need to remember that when Adriano has that 2004-2005 season coming off of the Copa America, he becomes somewhat of a legend because, as I said, he scores goals, he has an incredible shot power, so much so that the football game Pro Evolution Soccer gave him shot power. And in some aspects, he was unstoppable even in video games because he could stand quite literally anywhere on the pitch, at least 40 yards and in, and shoot and he'd test the goalkeeper. So for a generation, he became Mr. 99 shot power, the guy known who could basically win a game on his own. You get the ball to Adriano and he shoots. To compare it for our, I suppose, the American viewers, he was sort of the Bo Jackson Tecmo Bowl player of his time. Now, if you don't know the Bo Jackson Tecmo Bowl thing, I suggest you YouTube that or either Google it, because that is sort of what Adriano was to Pro Evolution Soccer players in the 2000s. Another one that was impressed by Adriano was Zlatan Ibrahimovic, so much so that he said this in an interview. The way he was an animal. He could shoot from every angle. Nobody could tackle him. Nobody could take the ball. He was a pure animal. But as I said, a slow demise seemingly started happening because as the 2005-2006 season came about, his numbers were down. And in 2006-2007, even more so. Remember I said he scored 28 goals in the 2004-2005 season? Well, it was 19 the season after. And in 2006-2007, he only had 6 goals. Something had obviously happened to him, but no one seemed to quite know what it was. And that was seemingly the truth, because Adriano himself told Brazilian outlet R7 the following: "Only I know how much I suffered. The death of my father left me with this huge void. I felt very lonely. After his death, everything got worse because I isolated myself. I was alone in Italy, sad and depressed, and then I started drinking. I only felt happy when I was drinking. I do it every night. I drank everything I can get my hands on. Wine, whiskey, vodka, beer, lots of beer. I didn't stop drinking, and in the end I had to leave Inter." And he did. Inter themselves seemingly understood that it was time for a change. I mean, later on it surfaced stories that Adriano had been so afraid of missing practices that he wouldn't go to bed after one of his benders, meaning that he'd show up for practice drunk, and once physios and trainers understood this, they'd lay him away for him to sleep off the alcohol. And an escape from all this became Sao Paulo in 2008, because he went there on loan and he did pretty well. He scored 19 goals for Sao Paulo, and suddenly he seemed fitter, more enthusiastic, more motivated, and he looked perhaps a bit of the Adriano of old. He would eventually leave to go back to Inter after having shown that he still had some gas left in the tank in Brazil. But once he came back to Inter, though he showed glimpses of his old self, it was back to sort of the old things of Adriano not really being up to speed, of Adriano not really grasping the chances given to him, and perhaps not really being that motivated to continue on his career. In April of 2009, Inter granted him special leave to go back to Brazil in order to, I suppose, rekindle his career or sort of find some solace. And then he decided not to return. He didn't want to go back to Italy, as he described himself. It was a place that kind of reminded him perhaps of a time where he was sad, of being lonely, of not being able to cope with the pressure of being a player away from his family, away from his surroundings. So at age 27, he's released from Inter and he goes back to Flamengo in Brazil. Now remember, he's 27. And as a 28-year-old myself, I don't think your career is necessarily over in any way, shape, or form as a 27-year-old. And he kind of showed that when he went back to Flamengo. He scored a hat-trick against rivals Fluminense and became, again, a hero to the supporters as he led Flamengo to their first league title since 1992. And he did so alongside another video game called Hero. Because if you played Football Manager in the 2000s and you didn't sign Wagner Love, you weren't going to be winning anything. So you had the Pro Evolution Soccer star, I suppose, Adriano, and the Football Manager star, Wagner Love, playing together at Flamengo. And considering the name of Wagner Love and that Adriano was named the Emperor, Brazilian press sort of had a field day and they labeled the duo the Empire of Love, or O Império do Amor in Portuguese. Catchy, yes. Bizarre, certainly. Successful, definitely. And once Adriano started to show glimpses of his old self, obviously teams in Europe, as I said, he was only 27, 28 at the time, they wanted a piece of the cake. And he tried himself once more in Europe, this time going to Roma. And again, failing in Italy, because it didn't work out for him at all. He just wasn't able to cope with being away from Brazil, from where he was comfortable. And Roma released him. Remember I said he was supposed to be the heir to Ronaldo? Well, after the stint at Roma, he actually was. He went to Corinthians, who needed to replace Ronaldo because he'd retired due to injury. And Adriano sort of came in as the savior of, or sorts, I suppose, he was labeled that. And again, if you look at Ronaldo and you look at Adriano, there's sort of similarities to them in terms of being big, strong. At the time, I suppose, at times, they both were fast. They both wore Nike and they were both bald. They were also both supposed to be the number 9 for Brazil and supposed to be players who'd lead Brazil to glory. Whereas Adriano was not able to, Ronaldo did do that. He won the World Cup in 2002, as I mentioned earlier. But one thing Ronaldo wasn't able to do that Adriano did was to win a championship with Corinthians. Though Adriano didn't really play that much, but when he did, he scored the one goal that sort of streamlined Corinthians rather, to a league title. So Adriano's contribution were limited, but very valued. After the time at Corinthians, he tried himself at Flamengo again and Atletico Paranaense, but it just didn't work out. He just didn't seem fit, just didn't seem motivated, and perhaps he wasn't. There were rumors of him going to France to play for Le Havre, and that really didn't materialize either, because the talent was there and the potential was huge and seemingly limitless. The only thing that certainly had a limit was the motivation and, I suppose, the exuberance that he'd showed at youth for playing football. Now, why is this? Why is Adriano one of those what-if cases in football? And one of the reasons might be because he'd lost the motivation. Remember, his father had passed away. Adriano is from a very, I suppose, poor and difficult part of Rio de Janeiro, a favela called Vila Cruzeiro, and seemingly grew up in poverty. And he'd stated himself before that his father was the motivation for him playing football. And in playing football, he made his father proud. And they were able to find a better life outside of the favela with him earning money and obviously taking his family out of the poor neighborhoods. And once his father dies and his bank account becomes, I suppose, larger than anyone else's, at least in his near surrounding, what is the motivation to be playing football? You have everything, and the one person that perhaps is your greatest motivation passes away. With all this follows these odd stories. In 2011, there was a story about him shooting a girl in the hand with his bodyguard's handgun. Now, the story fell apart, but it just was one of several bizarre stories of Adriano having returned to Rio de Janeiro and sort of tried to live his life outside of football. He was also pictured holding an AK-47 next to a guy who was holding a gold-plated AK-47. The picture kind of became infamous, and I mean, it sort of summarized where Adriano was going in his career. He wasn't really that interested in playing football again, seemingly, and his life was more about partying and having fun. Perhaps something he hadn't had when he was younger, but then again, it kind of seemingly went bizarrely the way it shouldn't have gone, given that he had all the money to be living lavishly, but seemingly decided to go back to where he was from. Then again, perhaps that is where he was the most happy, and who can blame him for that? Adriano tried in 2016 to make one final comeback with Miami United playing in the lower leagues of the United States. There are clips of him on YouTube where he plays that final game of his career in one of these games against a different team in the Miami area, and you can see he's lethargic and slow and doesn't really seem up to speed. Then again, was he really motivated to make a comeback, or was it a PR stunt? Who knows? And who cares? Who cares about that? The career was seemingly over. Anywho, and Adriano wanted to try perhaps one last time to have fun with football. I think it was that one game, and his career was over. And since then, he has retired. He's not playing anymore. So what is Adriano up to these days? Well, for one, he's quite active on Instagram and is showing this nice blend of living a lavish lifestyle and being back at the favela and enjoying himself and perhaps finding a little bit of purpose in life. Because one of the things argued is that maybe his life and career lost a little bit of purpose once his father passed away. Again, he wanted to impress his father and make him proud and take him out of the poverty. But once his father passed away and they sort of had the bank account, as I mentioned earlier, what was the reason to become the best player in the world? And for someone who perhaps has lost a bit of purpose in his life, I suppose we can at least state that if he's happy, then who are we to say anything? But what we can say is that for every superhuman talent and potential he had, it was perhaps the most human of emotions that stopped him: grief, depression, and sorrow. Now, Adriano was destined to become Brazil's next number 9 and perhaps the best striker in the world, as I said. He was supposed to be the next Ronaldo, even though he was supposedly and supposed to be bigger, stronger, faster, and more technical. And at times he showed that perhaps he could have been. He could have been the best striker in the world, and considering how good Ronaldo was in his prime, perhaps Adriano could have been a little bit better than that. But he didn't. He fell by the wayside, and he'll become a person, a figure of folklore, and someone who we could sort of tell our friends and family about that we'd seen when he was at his absolute prime in the stretch of 2004-2005. But what Adriano does become is the greatest ever what-if story of the 21st century. Because what if Adriano hadn't been motivated? What if his father hadn't passed away? And what if Adriano had lived up to his potential? He could have become the best striker in the world. Right, that does it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, then I suppose there's a like button here somewhere and a subscribe and bell. Yeah, you know the drill. Anywho, if you'd like me to talk about a topic or try to explain something that you've been pondering or wondering more about, feel free to leave a comment and tell me what you would like me to talk about. And as always, thank you for watching.